Should you be squatting and deadlifting to build muscle? Look, short answer is going to be it depends. I can't give you a yes or no. There's a multitude of factors which I'm going to dive into in this video. Now, generally there are two camps. A lot of people, more old school lifters, will say you need to deadlift, you need to squat, and then you need to bench. I'm just going to be talking about the squat and the deadlift for this video. They say you need to do the big three with a barbell. And that is kind of the old school thought. Go hard on those lifts, 3 sets of 5, etc., etc. And if you do those lifts, you're going to cover the whole body. And that's not a bad strategy. I think especially for beginners, I think doing isolated exercises to where you're doing a pec deck where you're just training your chest, or a quad extension where you're just training your quad, I think that can be a waste of time. Now, it's not bad. You're going to build muscle, and you might even build more muscle where you're just isolating one muscle at a time as a beginner. But in terms of time efficiency and in terms of the utility of these exercises for yourself, in the beginning, especially if you're a weaker guy, now it depends on your starting point. If you played football your whole life and you kind of sort of lifted throughout the years, and then you also built some muscle from playing, it's a little bit of a different situation. But for the average guy who's not that strong, who is just beginning, does the squat, the deadlift, the bench, maybe the pull-up, do those exercises cover your entire body? Pretty much, with the exception of the calves and then the biceps, and it depends on what variation of the pull-up you do. But those 3 or 4 exercises, maybe you throw in one for the front delts, those pretty much cover your entire body. And in the beginning, you don't need to be lifting 6 days a week, 7 days a week. You don't need to be spending 2 hours in the gym, trying to hit every individual body part and take it to failure. That is going to be suitable, and it's going to be more efficient, to be honest, in the beginning. Now, once you've been lifting for a little while, into the intermediate, into the advanced stage, 2+ years, and it can also be specific lifting numbers. Maybe once you've hit a 225 bench, 315 squat, a 405 deadlift, or even higher. Depends on the person and your frame. But once you've hit certain numbers, then those lifts get a little bit more problematic. Because as you get stronger, in the beginning, when you're not lifting that much, those heavy compounds, they're giving a good stimulus to your whole body, and they're not that fatiguing because you're not that strong. Once you start benching your body weight, once you start deadlifting 2 times your body weight, you can't really be doing that 2 times a week. A very common lifting split is the push-pull legs, which should be capped off by the bench, and then the deadlift, and then the squat. And most people will do push-pull legs twice a week. So 6 days on, 1 day off, and repeat. And if you were going to be headlining those lifts, starting those lifts out with those heavy compounds, it's just not practical to be squatting and benching 4 times, or squatting and deadlifting. Bench you can maybe get away with because it's not as fatiguing, you're not using as much weight. But those heavy lifts that load the entire posterior chain, the hamstrings, the glutes, the spinal erectors, the lats, the rhomboids, the traps, the quads, the abs, a good chunk of your body, over half your body, is getting at least utilized. You can't be doing that 4 times a week with a heavy load. In the beginning, the first year, you can. As an advanced lifter, once you get strong, once people see you and they know you lift, it's not a practical situation to be doing heavy lifts multiple times a week. It just isn't. And at that point, there becomes, it's like we're balancing these two things. Because you want to get as much stimulus as possible, and you want to manage the fatigue. And in the beginning of your lifting career, and the fatigue also kind of comes with injury risk, because those two to a degree work hand in hand, but you want to manage the fatigue. You want your fatigue low, relatively, and you also want to have your injury risk low, while having a high level of stimulus to said muscle groups you want to work. And in the beginning, that stimulus to fatigue ratio, it does make a lot of sense to do those heavy compounds. Once you get to a certain point, and I can't give you a specific number. I can't say once you can bench 1.2 times your body weight, that's the point to where you should be doing more isolating movements, where you're just working your pec 2 sets to failure, then you just work your triceps 2 sets to failure. But there does become a point in time, and it's different for everyone, like I've said, where those exercises, those big 3 exercises, the heavy compounds with the barbell, make less and less sense from purely a bodybuilding standpoint. Now, if your goal isn't bodybuilding, if your goal isn't to build muscle, if your goal isn't to, just to gain muscle, if that's not your sole goal, if you're looking for more of a I just want to be healthy, and I want to cover most of my body. I only want to lift a few times a week, and I only want to lift for 30 minutes. That's a different situation. I'm specifically talking from the framework of you are looking to maximize your muscle gain, even if it's less efficient. So if one set of bench builds 2 pounds, I'm just going to throw out these numbers out there. This is not how this works, but if one set of bench builds 2 pounds of muscle in your chest and your triceps, and then one set of pec deck and one set of tricep extension builds 3 pounds of muscle, 1.5 each. The pec deck slash tricep movement is less efficient. You're only getting 1.5 pounds of muscle per set. But you are still building more muscle. And that's kind of the gist I'm getting at, is you are going to, although it's technically less efficient, you are going to be building more muscle once you start isolating more, and you can push said muscle group to failure. Now, you might be saying, well, that doesn't make any sense. You know, if I can train my chest and my triceps at the same time, why would I not do that? And that's for the sole fact that if you are doing a compound lift, if you're working over more than one joint, you know, a squat is working over your ankle, your knee, and your hip, you have so many different areas where you can fail. You can fail from a balance standpoint. You can fail from a cardiovascular standpoint. You can fail from a form standpoint. And if your goal is to build the quads, you can fail from a bunch of different muscular standpoints. Your abs can give out before your quads give out. And if that's the case, if something other than the muscle you're looking to train is what's giving out, then that's a problem. For you to build muscle, you want to be taking said muscle relatively close to failure or to failure with a relatively consistent form. And if something other than your quads are failing, well, then we need to do a different exercise. We can't be doing the barbell back squat because there's 8 different things to fail before my quads fail.